So I'd like to begin today, as usual, by welcoming you all, greeting you all, whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you are. And in particular, today is in the United States, Independence Day. So happy Independence Day, happy July 4th to all our American listeners. And we will begin this, begin this morning, as usual, by reciting the prayers for Refuge and Bodhichitta. So please recite these prayers with great faith and devotion, keeping the meaning and the words together in your mind. Mo sanye chedan sogi chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dage chenyen yi pe sunam ji rola penjir sanje rubar sho sanye chedan sogi chonam la Chancho bardo dane chapsum je dagi chenyen gi be sanam gi rola penjir sanje drobar sho sangye chedan sogi chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum je Dagi chenyen gi pe sunam ji dola penjera sanje drobar sho. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen tamje dewa tan dewe judan dembra juji. Nonga dan donga ji judan rawa juji. Tonga mebe dewa tamba tan min rawa juji. Nirin chatan niran rawa tanyan shempola nebra juji. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or aversion for, or hatred for those near or far. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. So now think to yourselves that we are listening to and contemplating the Dharma today in order to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space, to the state of completely perfect Buddhahood. And in order to do this, we need to listen to and contemplate on the Dharma. So please listen with this motivation of bodhicitta today. The Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. And so this commentary, Youthful Play, has, the Treasury of Abhidharma has 8 chapters, and of the 8 chapters, we are speaking about the sixth area, the teachings on the paths in individuals. In other words, this is a teaching on the truth of the path. When you're talking about the truth of the path, that means you're also talking about the individuals, the noble individuals who are on the path. Because when you think about what is the Sangha, well, the Sangha is that feature that makes is particular to a learner who is on the path, that makes them different. That is the truth of the path is the quality that makes an individual different, that makes them noble. So that is what we're looking at. So those beings who have that quality within them are, in a sense, our noble Sangha. The noble Sangha meaning those beings who have achieved the noble paths. That's on the path. And then when you get to the level, when you look at the Buddha, well, what is it that makes a Buddha? It's the qualities that makes the Buddha. And what are those? Well, according to the Great Exposition, those are the path. So when we're talking about the paths and individuals, this is talking about in particular, the truth of the path. So that is what we've been discussing. And this explanation of the 6th area has 3 parts: the explanations of the paths, the explanations of the individuals, and then in third, a specific explanation of the paths, which is the section we are currently discussing. And the specific explanation of the paths has the qualities of the different paths, which was talking about the different 4 paths, of the paths of joining, no obstacles, liberation, and distinctive path, those 4 paths. Then the second aspect is to talk about the presentation of the factors of enlightenment, and the third section is talking about the liberation attained through the paths. So we talked about the qualities of the different paths yesterday. We finished that yesterday. And so we're now talking about the factors of enlightenment. So the factors of enlightenment are those factors, those things that are conducive to or bring you to enlightenment. Factors is not an entirely literal translation, but I think it works. It's the thing that brings you there. It's like a cause. So these are, in a sense, the path. And then enlightenment is the result. So yesterday we spoke about what is the result. It is knowing, extinction, and non-arising, which means knowing that you have fully known the truth of the path. That's knowing extinction. Knowing that you have fully known the truth of suffering, knowing that you have fully abandoned the truth of origin, knowing that you have fully manifested the truth of cessation, and knowing that you have meditated upon the truth of the path. That's the knowing extinction. The knowing non-arising means knowing that there is nothing more to know. There's no more suffering to know. There is no more origin to abandon. There is no more cessation to manifest, and no more path to meditate upon. So that's knowing extinction and knowing non-arising. So then how do we get there? We get there by following the 37 factors of the path. And so just to kind of what do we say? To review those, the 37 factors of the path are, what do we have here? Oh, there we go. Let me see. I have to get everything ready and show you. So we've got the 37 factors of enlightenment, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, mindfulness of body, feelings, mind and dharmas, the 4 complete abandonments, which we spoke about yesterday, striving to give up the negative qualities you already have, working not to let any new ones arise, striving to produce those virtuous qualities that you have not yet developed, and trying to increase the ones or develop the ones you have. And the 4 feet of miracles. These are 4 types of concentrations, about thinking about effort and mind. oh, what is it? Effort, mind, samadhi, and focus. I'm sorry, these are not ones that I speak about quite as often, and so they're harder to remember. But basically, it's what is it? Yes, effort and mind and analysis and aspiration, wishing. So these are four qualities that are spoken about in the sutras. They're also mentioned in the Mahayana. They don't play as big a role there, but they are mentioned, they're talked about, and perhaps I just haven't read the texts. It's probably likely that I haven't read the texts where they are discussed at length in the Mahayana. According to the Chimma Abhidharma, they are similar to the factors that eliminate the obscurations to the five faults of meditation, or the five faults of absorption, which are laziness, forgetting the instructions, laxity and excitation, or being dullness and agitation grouped together as one, lack of effort and effort. So these are five faults that we can have in our meditation. So they're talked about as similar to the antidotes for those. They're sort of equated there. Now, he doesn't specifically say there that they are, but he kind of equates them. So this is a point where they could be, what do we say? There's something to look here to see what is the relationship between these two. In any case, when we're talking about these 4 feet of miracles, what we're talking about are the 4 qualities of wishing and aspiration, mind, and samadhi that actually bring you to develop the 4 that bring you to develop the actual meditation, being able to rest one-pointedly. Then we have the 5 faculties: the faith, diligence, mindfulness, samadhi, and prajna. And then the 5 powers, which are the same thing. The difference between the two is that the 5 powers come later. And so during the first stage, when you first have the 5 faculties, then at that point, it's possible for the afflictions to kind of get at them and to kind of interfere with them a little bit. When they're at the stage of the 5 powers, the afflictions and the obscurations cannot interfere with them. Then there are the 7 branches of enlightenment and the Noble Eightfold Path. So those are the 37 factors of enlightenment that we have been discussing. So now we have come to the section in the text that describes these 37 factors. And so this is on the bottom of page 487. We are at the section, the cause, the dharmas of the path. Oh, wrong one, excuse me. Yes, so the cause, the dharmas of the path, this has 3 topics: explaining the term as an overview, the actual classification and grouping, and the proof of the grouping in 10. In other words, we've got 37, and they're grouped in these sets of 4 foundations of mindfulness, 4 complete abandonments, and so forth, all the way up to the Noble Eightfold Path. But you can also kind of classify them differently. But first of all, we have explaining the term as an overview. So why are they called the factors of enlightenment, or the things that are conducive to enlightenment? They factor in it. So the 37 are its factors in terms of name. So that means that they're the factors. They are the things that lead to it. It's like a fact. Of course, the English word factor has many different names, but one thing is that we think about a factor as something that kind of causes a later situation, and that's similar to the Tibetan word choktun, and also to the Sanskrit, which is what, pakshabhagi or something like that. And so those are the same way. It's leading to enlightenment. So they factor in it, or they lead to it. They're conducive to it. So the 37 factors of enlightenment, or the 37 factors of enlightenment, which include the 4 foundations of mindfulness, etc., are called its, or enlightenment's, factors. And so here, when you talk about them as 37, they're classified in terms of their names. Well, what do we say? 4 those are the names that they're given in the sutras. They're called, as the Buddha taught, about the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the complete abandonments and the feet of miracles and so forth. So they're classified there by their names as 37. But then we have the actual classification and grouping. And so what this is doing is it's saying, well, we've got these different things. Like we've got the 4 foundations of mindfulness, right? Well, what are they really? We discussed that before when they came up earlier. We talked about how the 4 foundations of mindfulness are actually prajna. So they're prajna. So all those 4 in one sense can be grouped together as that one of prajna. Or they can be, some of them are like faith or diligence or whatever. So they can all be kind of grouped into different, mainly mental factors. So, and when you bring them down in this sense, then they go into 10 different groups based upon what they are in substance. So in substance, 10. Faith, diligence, and mindfulness, full knowing or prajna. Samadhi, equanimity, and joy. Considering, discipline, and pliancy. So faith is that clear feeling. Diligence is like a zest for virtue, as what we read in the Way of the Bodhisattva. Diligence is a zest for virtue, or an enthusiasm for virtue. Mindfulness, remembering, in particular remembering what you're supposed to be doing. Prajna, the ability to distinguish what is Dharma and not Dharma. Samadhi, resting one pointedly on the focus. Equanimity is like always not being balanced, not being biased, or not getting too upset about things. Joy, considering, is thinking about things on a kind of coarser level. Discipline, this is the only one of these that is not a mental factor. Discipline is actually what do we say? What's the form? The causal. The imperceptible form is, sometimes I get stuck on the English terms, the imperceptible form of keeping of vows, which is either like one of the pratimoksha vows, the lay or the precepts, or here also the undefiled vows, the natural restraint from unvirtuous actions that you gain when you see the Four Noble Truths. And then pliancy. Pliancy is just your mind being workable, your mind and body being being workable, able to do things. They kind of sit and they're kind of like, oh, you can make them do what you want them to do. So that's all of these 37 factors can be grouped in these. So how do you do it? So this has 2 points. There's the actual is first, and this is talking about the mindfulness foundations are full knowing. Let me see if I can get it all on one screen. Yes, that's better. So this one's the mindfulness foundations are full knowing, and diligence is called right endeavor. The feet of miracles are samadhi. So when we think about them, how are these 37 grouped as 10? Well, we've got the 4 foundations of mindfulness. They're all prajna. Full knowing means prajna. And diligence, well, right endeavor is diligence, right? Right endeavor is another name for the 4 complete abandonments. They're also called the 4 right endeavors, striving to give up what is the right endeavor? You have to give up your faults and develop your qualities. That's what we have to strive to do. So that's the right endeavor. And that's diligence and enthusiasm for virtue. And the feet of miracles are samadhi, as we discussed yesterday. So those are kind of the first 3 groups. And to go in detail about it, how are these 37 grouped as 10? So how are these 37 factors of enlightenment grouped as the 10 different dharmas, the 9 mental factors, and the 1 of discipline? Well, the 4 foundations of mindfulness are prajna, because as it is said, he views the body and rests. So whoever it is, the monk or the nun, is viewing the body and they rest viewing the body. Seeing and knowing. It's not just resting, oh, I'm looking at the body. It's like knowing. It's important. You've got that prajna of distinguishing. And diligence is called right endeavor, or the 4 complete abandonments, because as it is said, arouse interest, make efforts, be diligent. This is the quotation from the sutra, which I read yesterday. The nature of the 4 feet of miracles is samadhi. So those are those 3 groups. We've got those 3 groups. That's, what is it? It's 12 mental factors, which are already broken down, or there's 12 of the 37 different factors, which are already grouped down into 3 different mental factors, right? Full prajna, diligence, and samadhi. So that's kind of condensing quite a few down. Then we have the next ones are the 5 faculties and the 5 powers. And they're told by their names: faith, diligence, mindfulness, samadhi, and prajna. Those 5. In substance, those are what they are. And the powers are exactly the same. The names are the same, and the thing is the same. The only difference is that the powers are strong enough that they cannot be interfered with by the afflictions. The faculties develop earlier. They can be interfered with. The powers cannot. So then after the, so in that way, that's going through, that kind of describes them all, describes many of them so far. So now we have more of a detailed, what do we say, detailed classification of them. So the 4 foundations of mindfulness, plus the branch of enlightenment that is the full discernment of dharmas. This is the second of the branches of enlightenment. And right view, that's on the Noble Eightfold Path, right? Right view. These are all prajna only. So those, so the 4 foundations of mindfulness, 1 of the branches of enlightenment, and then the right view from the Noble Eightfold Path are full knowing, they're prajna. The 4 right endeavors, the branch of enlightenment, right diligence, and right effort, which is one of the Noble Eightfold Path, are solely diligence. And so then the 4 feet of miracles, the branch of enlightenment, samadhi, and right samadhi are solely samadhi. The branch of enlightenment, mindfulness, and right mindfulness are solely mindfulness. And the 3 branches of enlightenment, joy, pliancy, and equanimity, which are on the path of seeing, as well as right thought, are indicated by their names. Right thought would go into considering. Thought is a type of considering here. So right speech and right action and right livelihood are discipline in substance. So that is the way the 37 are all condensed down into the 10 different dharmas. Now, when we're talking about it, actually, because if you remember, when we were speaking about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, for example, we said, well, their nature is prajna, but actually they include all phenomena. So why are we only talking about prajna here? The reason is because we're talking about the main thing. As this elaboration says, the main is mentioned. They are also all qualities produced by training. So there are 2 points here. The first is that when we say that the 4 foundations of mindfulness are prajna, that's the main thing, but of course everything else is involved. And similar with the other ones, they also, like the 4 complete abandonments and so forth, also involve other mental factors, but we're talking about the primary one. The other point is that they're all qualities produced by training. This means that, like, when you have like faith or diligence or so forth, sometimes you have it by birth just because of your previous merit. That's excellent, but it doesn't get called one of these factors of enlightenment. When we're talking about the factors of enlightenment, we're talking about the ones that are produced by training. So if you, in other words, we're saying, if you just were born with a lot of faith and that's just part of your character in this lifetime, that's excellent. But it's not yet a factor of enlightenment. You also have to do something to make it into a factor of enlightenment. You have to train in it. So the commentary here reads, in the explanation of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and so forth, as full knowing or prajna, discipline, and samadhi by nature, the main substance is mentioned. But if their associated factors are included, they, that is, the foundations of mindfulness and others, the complete abandonments and the feat of miracles, and not including the faith and so forth that are attained on birth, are all qualities of listening, contemplating, and so forth that are produced by training. In other words, your faith and so forth that is born, arises on birth, doesn't really become a factor of enlightenment until you start trying to practice them as the factors of enlightenment. Then they do. And of course, it's at that point, it's much, because you have it already, it's easier to develop than someone who has less. But merely having it by your character is not enough. So then the question is, well, when do these different factors of enlightenment come about? Well, they come about as you go along the path. And so this is what's spoken about in the next topic, which says, during which periods one meditates on. So when do you start meditating on the Noble Eightfold Path. We hear about this all the time. It's like one of the most popular Buddhist topics we talk about. So do we start with the Noble Eightfold Path right away? Well, as it says here, respectively, the 7 groups emerge among beginners and precursors to realization, clear realization on meditation and on seeing. So this is saying that some of them are for beginners. Beginners are what? They're the people on the path of accumulation. Some among the precursors to clear realization. So what are the precursors to clear realization? That's a synonym for the 4 stages of the path of joining, right? And some of them come on meditation, that is on the path of meditation, and some come during the path of seeing. So the commentary reads, during which stages do which factors of enlightenment emerge, you ask? So the Great Exposition says that respectively, these 7 groups of the 4 foundations of mindfulness and the complete abandonments and the feat of miracles, faculties, powers, branches of enlightenment, the Noble Eightfold Path emerge among beginners. So that means that the 4 foundations of mindfulness, complete abandonments, and the feat of miracles emerge among beginners on the path of accumulation. And on the 4 precursors to clear realization, that would be the faculties and the powers. And then on the paths of meditation and on the paths of seeing. On the path of meditation, you have the Noble Eightfold Path. And on the path of seeing, you have the 7 branches of enlightenment. But sometimes there are differences. Some people, so the paths of meditation, here, and this is the 7 branches of enlightenment on the path of meditation and the Noble Eightfold Path on the path of seeing. So others present the 7 branches of enlightenment as the path of seeing and the Noble Eightfold Path as the path of meditation. And to show that presentation, to just sort of go back to this, we've got our 4 factors, our 37 factors of enlightenment, right? So here we have the first 3, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and the 4 complete abandonments, and the 4 feet of miracles happen during the path of accumulation. So during the path of accumulation, we can kind of divide it into 3 stages. And in the beginning of the path of accumulation, you practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Then you practice, in addition to the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 complete abandonments. And then on top of that, in the middle stage, and then the greater stage, you meditate upon the 4 feet of miracles. That's the path of accumulation. During the path of joining, you meditate on the 5 faculties and the 5 powers. So the 5 faculties are they're not as strong yet. So that is on the stages of warmth and peak. Then the 5 powers are when you're on the stages of forbearance and supreme worldly Dharma. That's when they get really strong, on those stages. Basically, as your meditation is getting better and better, then your faculties get stronger and stronger and become powers. Then here I've got this as the alternate presentation here. The 7 branches of enlightenment are on the path of seeing, and the Noble Eightfold Path is on the path of meditation. The main teaching in the text is the other way around, the 7 branches of enlightenment on the path of meditation and the Noble Eightfold Path on the path of seeing. The path of seeing is so short, it's basically, after 15 minutes, you've got both anyways. But that's the order, that is the order that they arise. So you can sort of see that they're coming in order, and they bring you to enlightenment. So to return to our text. So now the question is, when they come up, are these defiled or are they undefiled? So what do we mean when we say that they're defiled? Well, defiled phenomena are ones that the afflictions, that the kernels can develop in relation to. Those are defiled. And then the undefiled are the phenomena in which, when you focus on them, the afflictions cannot develop in relation to. So the branches of Bodhi, that is the branches of enlightenment, and the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, are undefiled. The rest are twofold. That means twofold. All of the other factors can be either defiled or undefiled. So how many of the factors of enlightenment are defiled and how many are undefiled, you ask? The branches of Bodhi or enlightenment and the Eightfold Path are solely undefiled. Why are they undefiled? Because they are contained within the paths of seeing and meditation and no more learning. On those paths, when you are doing the meditation, which is when these come up, you only have undefiled consciousnesses, and therefore these factors are also undefiled. The rest are twofold, both defiled and undefiled, because they can be present during the equipoise and post-meditation of all 5 paths. So when you have the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you can do them on the path of accumulation. When you're doing them on the path of accumulation, when you're meditating on them on the path of accumulation, you haven't yet developed any, you've never seen the undefiled before. And so you can't, so your 4 foundations of mindfulness at the beginner are wonderful, but they're still defiled. When you achieve the path of seeing and you meditate upon the 4 foundations of mindfulness on the paths of seeing or meditation or no more learning, then they are undefiled. So that's how they can be twofold. Similarly with the 5 faculties, 5 powers, the 4 complete abandonments, the 4 feet of miracles. Okay. So those are talking about them in terms of defiled and undefiled. And since we're talking about the Abhidharma, we also have to talk about which of the levels, that is, which of the levels of dhyana or formless or the desire realm are they on? So that's the next one. They all are on the first of dhyanas and not enable except joy. So on the first dhyana, you can have all 37 factors. On the undefiled preparations, not enable, all of them, except for the factor of joy, can be present. You can't have joy because on the undefiled, not enable, you're working too hard. You don't have joy. You're working too hard. It's a neutral feeling. On the second, that is the second jhana, you have all except for considering. And on the 2, except for those 2. That is the third and fourth jhana, you don't have considering or you don't have joy. And special dhyana, you also don't have considering or joy. On the 3 formless realms, not those, nor the factors of discipline. So all those that are included in discipline are not on the formless realm because there is no form in the formless realm, and therefore there can be no discipline because discipline is the imperceptible form. They're in desire and on the peak, except for enlightenment and the path. So you've got all of them in desire and on the peak, that is the 4th of the formless absorptions, except for the 7 factors of 7 branches of enlightenment and the noble eightfold path. So to explain, how many factors of enlightenment are there on each of the levels, you ask? They are all able to be on the actual practice of the first of the jhanas. So they're all able to be there. They're not necessarily there. If you haven't developed the noble paths yet, for example, if you develop the jhanas before you achieve the noble paths, then you don't have the noble factors, and so forth. And on not enable, there are the 36 with the exception of joy. So not enable is that preparatory meditation for the first jhana, the undefiled preparation for the first jhana, and that can have all except for joy. As I described before, you're just working too hard, so it's a neutral feeling, and there's no joy. Joy is like a really special characteristic of the first jhana. It's really kind of an important thing. And when you listen to Theravada teachings on the jhanas, they spell it differently. They spell it, I think, with 2 J's, H-A-N-A, jhana. The jhana states are like the joy of the first jhana. The first jhana is really an important factor. Piti, it's called in Pali. So on the second jhana, there are all except for thought, which is considering for 36. So thought is by nature considering. You've got the 2 factors of considering and analysis, and neither of those are on the second dhyana. And on the 2, that is the third and fourth dhyanas, there are 35 except for those 2, joy and thought. So there's no joy and there's no considering on the third and fourth dhyana. Why is there no joy? It's because there is no mental pleasure on either of those feelings. In fact, on the third jhana, you have cognitive pleasure, but it's different, as we discussed in the second chapter. And on the fourth jhana, you have a neutral feeling, so there's no joy on either of those 2 levels. There is joy on the second jhana. On the special dhyana, so the special dhyana is like an intermediate stage in between the first and the second dhyanas. It's kind of like well, we'll get to it in the 8th chapter in a little while, but it's basically, you have, on the first jhana, you have both considering and analysis. Considering is thinking about things on a course, is examining things on a coarse level, and analysis is looking at them on a fine level. So on the special jhana, the coarse consideration is gone, but there's still analysis. On the second jhana, there's neither consideration nor analysis. So, and on the special dhyana, 2, there are likewise 35. In other words, there's no consideration, so no thought, no right thought, and there's no joy. On the first of the, there's no joy because it's another level where you have to work hard, so it's neutral. The feeling on the special dhyana is neutral. On the first 3 formless 2, there are not those 2, joy and thought, nor are the 3 factors of discipline, right speech, and so forth. So there may be 32. You may have up to 32. The 3 factors of discipline aren't there because there is no form. Right speech is considered discipline. Not only is there no right speech, there's no speech on the formless realm because there's no form. So then the 22 are in desire and on the peak, except for 15, the branches of enlightenment and the noble eightfold path. Why aren't they in desire? Well, they're not in desire because desire is necessary. When you're in the desire realm, on the level of the desire realm, your cognition is necessarily defiled. It's not an undefiled level. And also the peak, there is no undefiled absorption on the peak of existence. It's necessarily a pure or a defiled, but not an undefiled. It's so the peak of existence is necessarily defiled. So therefore, the undefiled factors, which are the branches of enlightenment, the noble eightfold path, are not on the peak of existence. Now, these may be included in either the substance of either the paths of accumulation or the nobles training or post-meditation, which means that you can be doing them either you are in the path of accumulation and joining, or when you are a noble being, when you're in equipoise, and when you're doing your training in meditation, or in post-meditation, when you are going on your alms round, when you are brushing your teeth, whatever. That's post-meditation, right? So that's the explanation of the main explanation of the 37 factors. But when you talk about the 37 factors, then there's also discussion of 2 factors. One is faith from knowing. So when does this come into play? What is faith from knowing? When do you get it? And then there's also the discipline that pleases the nobles. These are mentioned in the sutra. So when do they come? You get these other factors on the path. So when do you get them on the truth? Well, the faith that comes from knowing, the faith out of knowing can be for the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So it's seeing the 3 truths gains discipline and faith in Dharma out of knowing. So when you see the truths, you've actually seen them and you know them. Before that point, you're thinking about them, you think you know them, but it's not seeing. Seeing is not, because you haven't yet seen them. It's different when you've actually seen them. So you see them and you really know them. And that gives you great faith in the Dharma. And you think, the Buddha taught the Dharma, and the Dharma that he taught is true. And so when you see the first 3 truths, you gain the faith in Dharma out of knowing, out of the 3 jewels. You also gain the discipline that pleases the noble beings, because the discipline that pleases the nobles is the undefiled discipline. That's what really makes them happy, is to see the noble beings. If you've got the arhats and other learners and the Buddhists, and they see that someone has achieved the noble path and they're never going to do any unvirtuous actions again, and they are delighted. So and so that discipline that just naturally arises when you see the truth is discipline that is the undefiled discipline that pleases noble beings. So faith in Dharma out of knowing comes when you see the truths of suffering, origin, and cessation. Then you get faith out of knowing in the Buddha and his Sangha too, upon the path's clear realization. So when you have clear realization of the path, the fourth noble truth, then you also gain the the faith out of knowing the Buddha and his Sangha. Why is that? It's because the Buddha and the Sangha are by nature the path. So to read the commentary, at what point are the factors of enlightenment known to be the attainment of faith from knowing, you ask? So upon seeing the three truths of suffering, origin, and cessation, so on the path of seeing during those first 12 moments of clear realization, then you gain or attain the discipline that pleases the nobles, that makes them happy to see that you're naturally going to refrain from harmful actions, and faith in the Dharma out of knowing. So one attains faith from knowing in the Buddha and his Sangha of listeners too, upon the paths, the truth of the path's clear realization. So when you have the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th moments of clear realization, when you're seeing the truth of the path, and at that point you gain faith in the Buddha and his Sangha of listeners. So faith in these two is faith in the non-learner dharmas, the qualities that make the Buddha into a Buddha. What are the qualities that make the Buddha into the Buddha? It's his wisdom, and his wisdom is the truth of the path. And the faith in the learner dharmas that make the Sangha. What is it that makes the Sangha? It is the qualities that make you a Sangha. So the word "tu" indicates that the faith and discipline from knowing and the faith and discipline and Dharma from knowing are also attained at that time. So you also have even more faith. You have the faith. So basically, as you go through the 16 moments of clear realization, you gain faith in the three jewels out of knowing them, and you gain the discipline that pleases noble beings. So when we talk about the Sangha and the Buddha and the Sangha as being the truth of path, so what does that make the Dharma? Okay, so that's what the next one talks about. It has 3 points. First is identifying the essence of the Dharma. The Dharma is three truths and paths of the self-Buddhas or Pratyeka Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Excuse me. So the Dharma is the three truths. Well, the three truths are what? They're suffering, origin, and cessation. And in addition to that, the Dharma is also the paths of the, excuse me, okay, so the Dharma is also the truth of the path or the paths of the Pratyeka Buddhas. That is, the people are going to become like the rhinoceros Pratyeka Buddha or whatever, and the Bodhisattvas. The Bodhisattvas here in the tradition here, this means like the Buddha before he achieves enlightenment, before he embarks on the paths. So what is thought of as Dharma here, you ask? The Dharma in this context is the clear realization of the first three truths. And the learner and non-learner paths of the rhino-like self-Buddhas. Rhino-like is one of the types of self-Buddhists. There are 3 types of self-Buddhists, but sometimes it's used as kind of like a catch-all term for the self-Buddhas or Pratyeka Buddhas. So the Pratyeka Buddhas, it's the truth of the path of those Pratyeka Buddhas and the truth of the path of the Bodhisattvas, as well as the 17 antidotes for the peak of existence. That is the antidotes on the truth of the path and truth on the paths of seeing and meditation for the peak of existence. So within these, there is not a gathering of 4 bhikkhus, so they're not the Sangha. So the reason why we're saying like this is the Dharma and we're kind of carving it out as very carefully beyond from the Buddha and the learners, the reason we're doing that is because you want to be careful to say that, well, your Buddha, your Dhamma, and your Sangha are all clearly identified and that there's not like overlap. So they're clearly saying what is what. So the Buddha and the Sangha, as I said, are the truth of the path. But there's still a little bit of the truth of the path that is not included in them. What is that little bit? Well, it's the Pratyeka Buddhas, and then the Bodhisattvas. Now, so the truth of the path of the Bodhisattvas. When there's when the Buddha is sitting under the Bodhi tree between the time he sat down and the time he achieved complete enlightenment, when he's on the path, that's when he's a Bodhisattva. He hasn't become a Buddha yet. At that point, he's only one person. And when you have the rhino-like self-Buddhas, or rhino-like Pratyeka Buddhas, they go off on their own. They aren't sitting in groups. They're off on their own, meditating on their own. So there's only one of them. So because there are not 4 bhikkhus there is not a sangha. So the first definition of a sangha that we have is that it's 4 or more bhikkhus or bhikkhunis. That's the original definition of a sangha, 4 or more bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and that is the definition that they're talking about here. Of course, in English these days, we use sangha as kind of like a synonym for what in Protestantism is called a congregation, or your parish in Catholicism. It's kind of like, but it's a little bit different here in the Abhidharma. It's like 4 or, and in the Vinaya, it's strictly 4 or more bhikshus or bhikkhunis, a gathering of 4 or more. If you have 3, it's not a sangha. And then you also have the noble sangha, which are those beings who have achieved the noble paths. But that's the refuge. But here we're talking about the sangha in terms of being 4 or more bhikshus. So how many substances it has? So how many substances does this faith from knowing have? And this discipline that pleases the knowing? In terms of substance, they are 2. They're faith and discipline. It should be. Discipline that pleases the nobles is obviously discipline. And faith in the 3 jewels out of knowing is obviously faith. So in terms of substance, they are 2. They are faith in the 3 jewels from knowing, which is faith, and discipline that pleases the nobles, which is discipline. So now we know which of the different types of dharmas they are, and we can put them into those categories. So, well, then the question is, are they defiled or are they undefiled? They're stainless. So stainless is a synonym for undefiled. So the essential features is they're stainless. They, the faiths from knowing, are solely stainless. The meaning of faith through knowing is that knowing means realizing the truths correctly as they are through prajna, or full knowing. So really knowing them and seeing them correctly. And faith means belief. So of the 3 types of faith, it's the faith and belief, or conviction. So that goes through the 37 factors. Now, within the 37 factors, we've got all of these different things, and in particular, we have the truth of the path, which is all the right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. So there's the 8 aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. But the sutras also talk about right liberation, and what do we say? Right liberation and right knowing. So why aren't they included among the Noble Eightfold Path? Well, they're bound. So liberation, here it has the right liberation, right knowing, and a particular explanation of liberation. When we talk about right liberation, this has 2 points. Why is right liberation not one of the Noble Eightfold Path? As it says here, the reason liberation is not a learner's branch. They're bound, that is, the learners are bound, so liberation is not called a learner's branch. They're not liberated yet. When you're talking about someone who is liberated, that means that they are free. If you have someone who is chained and shackled, you've got shackles on their 4 limbs and on their neck. If you remove the shackles on their neck, are they liberated? No, they're still chained on their hands and legs. When you release the hands and one of the legs, are they free yet? No. It's the same with the listeners. They're not completely free yet. They're still stuck. They're getting close, but they're stuck. It's like, you're a prisoner, you're caught in your cell, you've managed to free yourself from 4 of the 5 shackles, but you still got 1 left. It's pretty good. You're going to get out of it, but you aren't out yet. So from a sutra, the learners possess 8 branches. The non-learners possess 10. So in addition to the 8 branches of the Noble Path, the non-learners have 2 more, which are right liberation and right knowing. So why are learners not explained as having right liberation and right knowing? You ask. So they, the learners, are bound by any one of the bonds of the afflictions. So they have at least one. And as long as you have one bond tying you down, you're not free yet. So liberation is not called a learner's branch. Without liberation, there can hardly be right knowing, because that is inherently the knowing of extinction and non-arising. So right knowing is the knowing of, the knowing of the enlightenment, that is the knowing non-arising and extinction that we have spoken about earlier today and yesterday. So the classifications of liberation. Well, so what is this liberation? Are there different types of liberation? It's twofold. Conquering afflictions is non-compound, while interest is composite. That is the branch, the 2 liberations. So here, when I was translating this, I debated a long time whether I should say while interest is compound. I was really tempted to do it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, because if anyone, compound interest is what we talk about in financial levels. So I couldn't do it, but I have to mention it here. So while interest is compound. So when you conquer the afflictions, when you remove the afflictions, then that is a cessation. It is non-compound, while the interest, the mental factor of interest, is composite. And so there are 2 aspects. There's the conquering, and then there's the interest, these two aspects. And so one is non-compound and the other is composite. In this way, it is twofold, 2 types, composite and non-composite. And so that is the branch of the branch of liberation. And so there are 2 liberations there. So liberation is twofold. In other words, it is both composite and non-composite. So the cessation of conquering afflictions is non-compound or non-composite. They're synonyms. While the learner's mental factor of interest is composite. And that composite liberation is the branch of the path, because it's not logical for a non-composite to be a branch. In other words, when you're talking about a branch, you have to, a branch either works towards something and goes together and puts together to make it, or it's like a part of something. How can something that is non-composite be a part of something? So it has to be the composite aspect. So that composite liberation itself, that is the branch itself, is said to, in the sutras, to be the 2 liberations. What are the 2 liberations? The liberation of the mind from desire and the liberation of full knowing from ignorance. In other words, the liberation of the mind from desire is that when you know that you are free of desire, that frees your mind. That is the liberation from desire. It liberates your mind. The liberation of the mind, you're liberating the mind from desire. And then the liberation of full knowing, liberating full knowing from what? Or eliminating prajna from what? From ignorance. You know that you've eliminated the ignorance, and so you are liberated from ignorance. Your prajna is liberated from ignorance. So you've got the liberation of the mind and the liberation of prajna. The mind is liberated from desire. The prajna is liberated from ignorance. So others say that the mind and prajna, or full knowing, are taught as liberation. So therefore, liberation can be other things than just interest, just the mental factor of interest. It is primarily the liberation itself of the mind from afflictions, they say. That's another position that some people take. And then we have the section on knowing. Enlightenment as taught is knowing. As we have already taught, enlightenment is knowing extinction and non-arising. So that which is enlightenment as previously taught is known as right knowing. So that's obviously not on the learner branches, because it is enlightenment. It is this, the knowing of extinction and non-arising. So now we have a particular explanation of liberation. What is liberation? Which paths? This has 4 topics. Which paths are freed from the obscurations? Which paths discard obscurations? The distinctions of liberation and so forth, and the 4 possibilities of revulsion and so forth. So to begin with, which paths are freed from obscurations? And which obscurations are they freed from? Non-learners' minds are liberated from obscurations of the future. So what is the mind that is liberated? What is it liberated from? The non-learners' minds are liberated from obscurations of the future, as it is said in the treatise. Remember, as we spoke about in the last chapter, in the great exposition tradition, they say that dharmas of the past and the present and future all exist substantially. So they're saying when you're liberated from future obscurations. Now, when you talk about future obscurations, though, there are two different types. There are the non-arising dharma bases, or as Ian Coughlin translates, the non-arising instances, which are theoretically there but could never happen. And there are also worldly conditions, worldly cognitions, and they're also liberated, but those are not really discussed here because they're not going to occur again in the future. They're not going to have the worldly, or the cognitions are not going to occur, and the non-arising instances of the afflictions and so forth just aren't going to happen. So really, when we're talking about liberation, we're talking about liberation from the future obscurations. And the second point is, which paths discard the obscurations? The path that is about to cease fully discards its obscurations. So like you have the obscuration is here, and you've got the path. The path arises, it abides for a brief time, and it ceases. So the path, this is like the moment of seeing suffering in the desire realm, the first moment, the Dharma forbearance of suffering in the path of clear seeing. That forbearance arises. It and the obscurations are there for a moment, then the path ceases, and it takes with it the or it doesn't take with it, but it also, when it dies, then when it ceases, then the obscurations are also abandoned. So you've got the obscurations, the path comes, and they both cease together. Then the next moment, you have the Dharma knowing. You have the knowing that comes out of the forbearance, the path of liberation. So at what time does the path discard the obscurations of the non-learner's mind? In other words, saying, is it like when the path arises at that time that the obscuration, or is it they're both there, and then while it's there, and then what is the relation between the discarding and the arising of the path? So the present path that is directed toward and about to cease fully discards its present obscuration. So you've got the present obscurations and the present wisdom, and this path is about to cease at the end of that moment, and at that moment it discards the obscurations. That's what it's saying. Then the next moment you have a new wisdom, the Dharma knowing, or the path of liberation. Distinctions of liberation and so forth. Now, the sutras also talk about three elements: the elements of extinction, the element of abandonment, and the element of cessation. So what are these? So just this liberation taught as non-composite, that is, non-composite liberation, is classified in the sutras as three, which are called the elements of abandonment, detachment, and cessation. So here, elements is kind of an automatic translation, or kind of mechanical translation of the Tibetan word come. In Ian Coughlin's translation, he translates it as realm, because when you talk about the word come, it can either refer to what we translate as realms, like the form, formless, and desire realms, or it can apply to elements, like the 18 elements of, mind, or what do you have? I, form, and I consciousness. So the word can refer to any of those. And so I kind of mechanically translated it as elements, but they're non-compound. So how can they really be elements? So Coughlin translated it as realms, and I think there's some merit to that, because you might think of a realm, but of course a realm is also, in a sense, compound. It's kind of a difficult term to translate accurately. At any rate, there are three of them taught in the sutras: the elements of abandonment, detachment, and cessation, and all three of them are the non-compound or non-composite liberation. So the features of these three are that the extinction of all attachment is called the element of detachment. The extinction of all other afflictions than desire is the element of abandonment. So when all the other, when they're gone, that is abandonment. The complete extension of the bases of all the afflictions. This means all of the other discards of meditation, all the form, sense, sound, taste, touch, and so forth, other than the afflictions. This is called the element of cessation, or cessation's element. That basis is the defiled aggregates, excluding the afflictions. So the defiled aggregates are the the aggregate of discipline, the aggregate of, I was just looking at it this morning. There are the 5 defiled aggregates. I will have to get back to you on those tomorrow. So, not tomorrow, the day after. So that's what these are. Basically, when we say that they're non-compound, what we're saying is when you have a thing, like you've got my hand is obviously composite. You've got my hand in front of the camera, and you can see my hand in front of the camera. That's a composite thing. Now there's no hand. That absence of a hand is not composite. It doesn't have any parts. It's like a cessation. It was visible and now it's not. So the absence is non-compound. It's not created by causes and conditions. If you're looking, so that is called that is what we're meaning. When you have the afflictions, you have desire, then the absence of desire, the cessation of desire is not compound. Okay. So in the last section here says the 4 possibilities of revulsion and so forth. Let's get this all on the same page, if we can. Forbearance and knowing suffering and cause bring revulsion. All that discard remove attachment. Thus there are 4 alternatives. So when you are going along the paths, sometimes when you're going along the paths, you feel revulsion, like revulsion for suffering, revulsion for karma, revulsion for afflictions. And sometimes you discard the afflictions, you discard the truth of suffering or whatever. So what is the relationship between the two? Are they the same or are they different? Is revulsion necessarily going to discard afflictions? Is discarding afflictions necessarily revulsion? So forbearance and knowing suffering and cause bring revulsion. That is when you're focused on the suffering, on the truth of suffering and the truth of origin, then you have revulsion. All that discard remove attachment. So any path that discards the afflictions, that would be like the Dharma forbearance of suffering, or the paths on the paths of no obstacles on the path of meditation, or whatever, remove attachment. So therefore, there are 4 alternatives. There are some things that bring revulsion, some things that discard. You've got these 4. And there are some things that do both and some that do neither. So to read the commentary, does a thing by which one develops revulsion free one from desire? So in other words, is it enough to just feel revulsion? It's not quite. There are 4 possibilities. The forbearances and knowings of suffering and cause, that is the origin, bring revulsion. So when you have like Dharma knowing of suffering and you see suffering, that it's impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless, you feel revulsion for it. Because they focus on things for which one feels revulsion. You look at the afflictions and you think, well, I don't like those. That's revulsion. The forbearance and knowing of cessation and path do not, because they focus on things that are supremely pleasing. When you're looking at cessation, what are you doing? This is what you need to manifest. It's like, oh, that's what I need. That's not revulsion. That's like interest. So all the forbearance and sufferings and knowings of suffering, origin, cessation, and path that remove detachment, that discard, remove attachment, because they are what discards the afflictions, as well as all the paths of no obstacles on the path of meditation. So in this way, there are 4 alternatives. In other words, if we had a Venn diagram, we would have 2 overlapping circles. So there are 4 alternatives between revulsion and detachment. The first, that which is revulsion but not freeing from desire or not discarding desire, is the paths that focus on suffering and origin that do not discard. Well, what are those paths? Well, they are the path of joining. Remember, we have the path of joining, no obstacles, liberation, and distinctive path. So when you have the path of joining, that's looking at the discards of suffering and origin. When they're focusing on suffering and origin, they're looking at suffering and origin, so they're producing revulsion, but they're not discarding. Or when you have the distinctive path, that you've already discarded them. You're kind of looking back at them and feeling revulsion, but they do not discard. So you feel revulsion for those when you're looking at suffering and origin. So the second possibility is discarding paths that focus on cessation and path. So you're looking at cessation and path, and when you see cessation and path, you're not feeling revulsion, but you are discarding if you are on the paths of no obstacles and paths of no obstacles. So that would be the paths of no obstacles that are focusing on cessation and path. The other paths, the joining path and the distinctive path, do not discard, right? The third is discarding paths that focus on suffering and origin. So when you have the path of Dharma forbearance of knowing suffering, or Dharma forbearance of knowing origin, or the subsequent forbearance of either, then those, they are discarding and you are feeling revulsion. So they're both. And the fourth is paths other than discarding paths that focus on cessation and paths. So like the paths of joining and the paths of the distinctive paths that focus on the cessation and path. And so in this way, just feeling, the point here is that feeling revulsion for something and discarding things are not the same thing. Now, revulsion is important. It's important to feel revulsion in the context of the great exposition tradition. It's important to feel revulsion for our afflictions and so forth, and say, hatred is causing me problems. Desire is causing me problems. Not to think, I don't want to deal. The truth of suffering. And even in the Vajrayana path, we say, like Milarepa is always talking about looking at samsara as like a pit of fire. This is a common thing. So that's revulsion of looking at samsara, looking at the truth of suffering and seeing it as suffering. This is necessary. But that itself, that revulsion is not itself what is going to free us from samsara. It's necessary because it brings us to do what we need to do, which is to have the discarding paths, which are the seeing the paths of seeing the truth, seeing the nature, discarding the afflictions. And so that is an important thing to realize. We need revulsion, but not all revulsion discards, and not everything that discards. So we also look at the things that we need to develop. If we think about the sutra of turning the wheel of Dharma, we need to know suffering by clearly knowing it. We need to abandon the afflictions by clearly knowing them. Both of those generate revulsion. And then when you have this, you need to manifest cessation. You're not feeling revulsion for cessation. Cessation is what you want. And then meditate on the path. Are you feeling revulsion for the path? If you are feeling revulsion for the path, you're not going to meditate on it. So what we did is to not feel revulsion on the path, right? So in this way, but those are all, so you need to have the revulsion, and you need to have the discard, but you also need to have develop the antidotes that discard the afflictions. So that is the main text of the chapter. So second, presenting the area's name. This completes the sixth area called Teachings on the Paths of the Individuals from the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma. So then Wangchuk Dorje glosses this with the full title. This completes the explanation of the sixth area called the Teachings on the Paths and Individuals from the explanation of the verses of Abhidharma called the Essence of Abhidharma, the words of those who know and love, explaining youthful play, opening the eyes of Dharma, the chariot of easy practice. So that is the full title of Wangchuk Dorje's commentary. A few words here. The only refuge of all those who yearn for practice is the supreme protector, the great and perfect Buddha. I followed with great respect the glorious jewel, disciple of the Shakyan king, that is of the Buddha, and Vajrakirti. So the glorious jewel here means is a fancy way of saying the fifth Sharmapa Kuntruk Yenlak or Kuntruk Bang, so one of his teachers, and Vajrakirti or Namgyal Drakpa, who was second of Wangchuk Dorje's two tutors. He studied Abhidharma actually with both of them. If I remember his biography correctly, he studied it first with Shamar Kuntruk Yenlak and then later with Namgyal Drakpa. the great master and received all the levels of teachings. I became unafraid to explain the meaning as it is of the 3 baskets and the 4 classes of tantras. In this, the Buddha's teachings were exalted. So at the time I awakened to all knowledge, and so while dwelling in White Cave, I wrote this treasury on the paths in individuals, the 6th part of my explanation of the treasury. The stainless waxing moon of virtue destroys the darkness that besmirches the victor's teachings in the lands of snow. May the teachings of the Karmakaju blaze. And so that completes the 6th chapter here. Let's see, I think we have a question here. Are there forbearances and knowings on the path of meditation also? This is like a big topic in the beginning of the 7th chapter, which we'll start going to next week. When are there forbearances? When are there knowings? There certainly is knowing. There are paths of no obstacles. Usually when we talk about the path of meditation, we talk about in terms of the 4 paths of the joining path and the path of joining, the path of no obstacles, and the path of meditation, the distinctive path. So we will go into this in detail starting next week, and you'll have enough of an answer for this question then. I hope. Okay. So we will now, what do we say? We will now just dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings throughout space, so that they may quickly be freed of all suffering. And so please recite these words once again, keeping the meaning and keeping the meaning and the words together in your mind. O sanam di tamje sikpani tobne nye bedanam pamche te kega nachi balong trukpai si pe tole drokun yudro sho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing and free, all being swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Chanchu semcho rinpoche make panam ke gyurchi keba nyamba me paryang gongne gongdu pelwar sho. May Bodhichitta, great and precious, arise in those who have not roused it, never weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. Okay, so thank you very much. We will resume on Tuesday, no class tomorrow, and then we'll resume on Tuesday. So thank you.